And welcome one more time to the Crosspolitic Countdown. I'm Andrew Southwick, joined on this episode by Luke Edison. And he is a Crosspolitic News contributor, journalist. Luke, it's good to see you. Thanks for making some time.
Good to be seen. Thanks for having me.
You have your latest article, if I can speak English. This is why I don't write words down. I just talk them. Your latest article, or at least one of the latest, and one that's gotten a lot of traffic and a lot of buzz on the crosspoliticnews.com website. Oh, I forgot to plug Crosspolitic News, crosspoliticnews.com. You can find all the articles there. But your latest one got a lot of buzz, entitled "The Many Faces of Tucker Carlson." Let me bring up the headline here for you. In it, you know, of course, Tucker Carlson was once the champion of conservatives. There were even rumors that Tucker Carlson for president, particularly after he was fired by Fox News. And of course, those of us who were old enough, I remember him on CNN with Paul Begala on a show called Crossfire, and he wore a bow tie and all kinds of stuff. And he was one of the lone token conservatives on CNN back in those days. And of course, we set record-setting ratings for Fox News with the Tucker Carlson show. Got fired there, went over to X, has got his Tucker Carlson network, and he has come under some criticism for platforming some very questionable and some even objectionable people. And you argue in your article that Tucker Carlson has undergone a number of dramatic shifts in his public persona and even in some of his ideological stances, raising questions then about his authenticity and his overall worldview. So, Luke, first, set up the scene here. What was it that gave you the motivation to write this article, and how do you see, or how did you and how do you see now Tucker Carlson as a journalist, as a leading conservative voice?
Yeah. So working backwards there a little bit, I'd say I have come to see him in a way that I think is all but inevitable for anyone who's been paying attention to him with their eyes open and with a sense of intellectual honesty, which is as an opportunist and a media chameleon. Who specifically, I think perhaps the Gen Z word for this might be something of a right-wing grifter. And for those who are, maybe millennials like myself or older, that would be, something like a chameleon who basically changes his views based on what is popular and based on what is frugal and beneficial for him at the time. Now, that doesn't mean that he necessarily, campaigns for Kamala one election cycle and for Donald Trump the next election cycle. Not that type of grift. He knows he's better than that. He knows his niche, and he knows how to kind of jump from lily pad to lily pad to stay relevant and to keep really this kind of cult of personality following that he's built. So that's kind of my general view on him there. And then as far as the impetus for this piece, it was really his interview with Nick Fuentes that I'm sure we can perhaps get into, or at least touch on a little bit here. I know it's touched on in the article. It probably deserves its own article, honestly. But that was the impetus and a lot of his shifting attitude when you compare that interview with Fuentes to something like his interview with Ted Cruz, where all of a sudden Tucker Carlson with Cruz was very capable of being, some would even say antagonistic, very much very firm as an interviewer, and very much more towards the side of investigative journalism with Ted Cruz. Whereas with Nick Fuentes, he kind of offered a lot of softball puff piece type of questions and nodded along with basically anything that Nick gave him to eat. So that's kind of my impetus there behind looking deeper into this.
Why don't we start there? You mentioned Nick Fuentes. Some people may not know really who he is, and that's actually for their benefit, to be honest. But Nick Fuentes is an online influencer. I wouldn't say he's a journalist, definitely an opinion influencer, commentator, but very anti-Semitic, very, really says disgusting and despicable things. It's all over X, and that's, at least that's where I've seen him, is on X. And Tucker Carlson gave him a platform, And you didn't see the same kind of pushback, as you kind of alluded to, for Nick Fuentes' views as you did for Senator Ted Cruz. And, that's just one contrast of many that have raised questions as to Tucker Carlson's authenticity. Tell us a little bit about just the Nick Fuentes interview. What caught your attention from that? Because that, of course, led to this article.
Yeah, absolutely. So diving a little bit deeper into kind of this contrast of the Ted Cruz interview, which is on the TCN, Tucker Carlson Network, compared against the Nick Fuentes interview. When you look at the Nick Fuentes interview, you see someone who is doing something that was described well by Dinesh D'Souza, where Tucker Carlson, he does this thing where he brings on guests who are very often controversial people, but people who tend to really hold his own beliefs. If you dig into it, they tend to echo back to him what he has already decided he believes. And he asks them these leading softball, very easy tee up questions that kind of very, very easily bring you to a spot where the interviewer then says something that Tucker does, his shock face and, his Tucker laugh about. And he goes, wow, Churchill was actually the bad guy and not Hitler, and he doesn't push back. So that's kind of Tucker's shtick, as Dinesh said. And I think Dinesh described it well. You contrast that against the Ted Cruz interview, where Tucker was very much capable of confronting Ted Cruz where and when he thought that he needed to, of bringing up counterpoints, of bringing up things that Ted had said or done in the past. All of this was completely absent from his Nick Fuentes interview. Ted was even asked, questions about like the population of Iran, and Tucker acted shocked, and all of his fans, of course, bid off on it as though it was some world defeating point that was made, where Ted Cruz didn't know the exact population of Iran, and yet he was willing to speak out against them. And Tucker uses these kind of gotcha points, so he's very capable of doing that when he wants to. But with Nick Fuentes, where there's a wealth of very meaty, significant questions to ask him about, what do you actually think about the Jews? Why did you say this about being, quote, Team Hitler, which he did say? What do you actually think about sexualizing underage kids? Because he has said that. That's in an other article that I've written. Questions like this that are very significant and you'd think very relevant to a journalist who's trying to find out about this new alleged leader on the right, Nick Fuentes, completely absent. So I just think that those were really telling that Tucker didn't go there with any of the substantive questions that could and should be asked.
It's on the screen now. You have a section in here on Sharia law, because Carlson had one position years ago on Sharia law. It was a sober warning. And in fact, let me bring that up here. I made a note of it. Let's see here. He warned that a lot of Americans are concerned about Sharia law. A strikingly large number of Muslims would like to see it supplant civil law. But more recent years, you contend that Carlson is mocking concerns. And so the question, or concerns about Sharia law. So my question here is, from Carlson's earlier sober warnings about Sharia law to his later mocking of the concern, for conservatives, for Christians who believe in protecting things like Western Christian heritage, who think that's an important part of America as a society, what do you see as the implications of this kind of shift, again, in someone who is a thought leader, who is someone who can issue marching orders and have a good portion of people buy into what he says?
Yeah, this is one I thought about a lot, and I want to try to navigate the answer as best I can, because I think that it's somewhat complex and it's heavily theological, I believe, and spiritual in its origins. So I think that there's a real push right now from specifically young men on the right, but generally young people on the right, most particularly men, to look for any system that gives a semblance of structure and discipline and leadership. And I think that is driving them to religions like Orthodoxy, like Catholicism and even like Islam. And even among those different sects, when there's disagreement, there's still this sense of what's again, to use a Gen Z term, what's been called basedness, being based. And so this is where you might see something like competing beliefs. Take a Catholic, an Orthodox member, and an Islamist, and you will see them retweeting and applauding each other because perhaps it's an Islamist saying women should remain in the kitchen and should not speak out against men. And these young men, they see this and they go, some structure, someone with some spine willing to stand up against the feminized culture. We love that. And it doesn't matter that the three of us have very different beliefs. We see this as based. And so we are allies now. And we are allies against, number one, the Jews, which they all do in this sect of the right, and of specifically, as you said, on X, the X right, I would call them. They do have a real hatred, not just for Israel, but for Jewish people, and also for other ethnic groups, for women. I mean, Nick Fuentes, you can check out my article specifically on him for his exact quotes where he says this stuff. He's openly racist. And so I think that there's on one hand, an understandable gravitational pull because of how feminized and leftist and wet noodle our culture has been for the past several decades. And what that's done now, though, is it's taken that pendulum and pushed it back in the opposite direction, where now it swings to this other type of extremism, which is also unchristian, and it's also against conservative values. So I think that Tucker is really in the midst of that blender. I know that there's kind of a lot there. We could probably talk for hours just about that, but that's an overview of my suspicion there.
Right. Yeah. You also have a quote in the article, and this is on X. You can see him when Tucker said this, saying that he dislikes Christian Zionists more than anyone, and he later apologized. But how should Christians interpret that? Now, you're bringing up some of the matters of theology here. Let's dig into that a little bit deeper. How should Christians interpret that in the context of theology? Loyalty in terms of support of Israel, even ecclesiology, doctrines of the church. Is there something Christians should be worried about, concerned about when it comes to Christian Zionists and how they're portrayed in media? What's a response to that?
Yeah. So again, each one of these topics are things that could have multiple articles written on them and could have very long, lengthy discussions about them. But I'll try and touch on it. So the short answer here, and then I'll dive a little bit into detail, is I think number one, this should be a huge red flag to Christians because I think we should take Tucker at his word. I think he tried to walk it back later. Again, he's a media chameleon. He saw it. He saw a huge backlash against, including coming from some of his fan base. And so he tried to walk it back a bit and say, I was just lashing out in anger. But I don't think he was. I think he was saying exactly what he believes, which is that in a world of Islamic threats, of rising atheism, of rising socialism and communism, who he dislikes most are his fellow Christians, Christian Zionists. I think we should take him at his word there. And the next thing I would say is that it's not at all heresy, as Tucker did claim it was, to be a Christian Zionist. So heresy, historically, is believing a belief against anything that is a core and essential element of what it means to be Christian. So, for instance, if you said, I believe that Christ came to the earth and died and rose again for our sins, and I said, I don't believe that, well, I would categorically be in Christian heresy. That is, what you presented is an essential element to Christianity, and I reject it. That's Christian heresy. Zionism is not against any core tenet of Christianity. Zionism is simply the belief. It's used as this boogeyman word, and it's very rarely defined because that kind of takes away the power of the boogeyman buzzword. But what Zionism is the belief that Israelis have a right to possess and defend Israel. That's it. That's Zionism. And the point I like to make here is it's the same exact thing we all believe about the Canadians and Canada and the English in England. I believe that the English have the right to possess and defend England. The Canadians have a right to possess and defend Canada, et cetera, et cetera. But for some reason, when you get to Israel, it gets this scary buzzword, Zionism, and you get people like Tucker Carlson saying that to even believe that as a Christian is Christian heresy. That, what he said, is actually a sin because it is a lie, and it's certainly not Christian heresy. So that's my overview answer to that topic.
And in a broad view, just in terms of the globalism, progressive worldview, borders only matter if it's a country that's not Israel or a country that's not America. Seriously, you talk about Christian Zionists believe the same thing we'd believe about Canada or any of these other countries, except the other place that we don't believe that is America itself. Whole nother conversation, myriad of articles, but it is an interesting because of the alignment and the ally between Israel and America. I don't think that's a coincidence, as it were. You've mentioned a couple times here on the program, you see Tucker Carlson as an opportunist, chameleon, and this a quote, who will do and say whatever is necessary to build and preserve his base. That's from your article. I'm going to stay on for Christians here. For Christians looking toward leaders in media or even politics as trusted voices, how do you think we should distinguish opportunism from genuine conviction? How do we tell? What are some markers that you look for as a journalist objectively?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's hard because many of these leaders, whether they be social influencers, newscasters, commentators, politicians, we don't know them personally. We don't get to see behind the curtain very often. So what you're going to be looking for are public indicators as much as is possible, which is really you're already playing kind of a handicap game there. Number one, which is addressed in this article as well, is any peeks behind the curtain. That's something that I love to get. And with Tucker Carlson, what we see is that Tucker claimed to, he really built his whole kind of resurgence of his career post Fox News on being the Trump guy, on being the MAGA against the establishment Trump guy. But what we actually saw with a text leak, which this stuff does happen, luckily, in the modern world, we do get these peeks behind the curtain, is that Tucker Carlson, when he thought no one was looking in a private text, he said that he passionately despises or passionately hates, I forget the exact quote, despises or hates Trump. And he said that he can't wait to stop talking about him. Now, we need to not only recognize how shocking that belief is, that personally held belief of him, but also the timing. The timing was right after Joe Biden claimed a very dubious election. So Tucker Carlson was essentially dancing on the grave of MAGA, happy to try to whisk us all away into obscurity and into history. And that is who he was behind the curtain. So that's a long way of me just saying any chance that you can get to have a peek at the person when no one is looking, have a real check of their integrity is going to be probably your number one indicator. And so that's something that you can look at for using multiple methods. You can try to have personal contact with them. You can look for leaks and provided information about their past and past held beliefs, perhaps lesser known events that they've spoken at where they thought no one was listening, things like that. The other one that I'll just touch on here is consistently upheld biblical values. That's what I would say for Christians. So what that would look like is through sober eyes, judging the person who you are elevating as a leader, whether it's a thought leader or a political leader, based on what the Bible tells us we are to look for in leaders. And sometimes that's going to include calling out leaders or acknowledging that you have disagreements with leaders who you otherwise value. I'll be the first to tell you, I've found value in things that Tucker has said and done in the past. But that doesn't mean that we can't or shouldn't call him out when he starts to get exposed in a grander sense. So two kind of indicators there. Hopefully that's helpful.
From your vantage point, how significant do you think the role of media and media personalities are now in shaping the worldview of conservatives? And you can extend it to conservative Christians as well. And I will say this, a peek behind the curtain. The media industry is really a part of what's called the entertainment industry, and that has many facets. It's movies, it's television, it's sports, it's music, but it is also news. If you go to the penthouse offices of the major networks, you'll find out that they're in the entertainment business, not the news business. It's just the form of entertainment is news and news talk. I say that to say it is not a surprise that a news personality could be perceived as, to be a chameleon, as you say, or an opportunist. And Tucker would not be the first one either. But what that tells us is really you have a culture of that, and we have been consuming that news as a window into at least the truth of what's going on in the world as objectively as possible for decades and decades now. So that brings me back to my question. Is the role of media and media personalities significant when it comes to influence with conservatives and conservative Christians? And does that or does it not present any unique risks for conservatives and conservative Christians? Because overall, you would think of the opportunists would be more on the Democrat side, and they certainly are. But this one resonates because Tucker was one of, if not the most prominent and most influential conservative talker for a period of years.
Yeah, I do. I think it is something that has influence over the Christian right. I think it's something that we as the Christian right should temper. I think that we should be mindful of it and should really make a sound effort to prioritize more of our local relationships. And so what that would look like is your local community, your local church, your state and county and town leadership. These are people who, going back to what I said earlier about getting a peek behind the curtain and knowing their integrity and knowing them on more of a personal level, these are people who that's actually possible for, right? You can actually walk into your local congressman's office, certainly your local state house representative's office. You can actually walk into your pastor's office and have a face-to-face conversation. Same thing with your local community leaders. So I think that we as Christians should prioritize those where we have not only the ability, but also I think the biblical calling to reach out to people who we can directly influence, rather than elevating and letting these, essentially, like you said, entertainment celebrities, to call them what they are, have a major role in our lives. So what that would look like for me is really perhaps, paying attention to Tucker every now and then, hearing what he has to say, but really the heart of the issue and the heart of who I am and how I'm going to build my life, all of those decisions are made and influenced at home by me and my family and my community and my church and my friends. That's where I really find my my grounding, and of course, all bound together as a Christian by God. So that's kind of how I would just perhaps try to flip that on its head, where what is, for many, plays a primary role, which are these media entertainment celebrities, put those into the secondary role and bring the home front more front and center.
Do you think that the political right, should boycott or stop listening to Tucker Carlson over these things? That's part one of the question. And then part two, is there a way that he can rebuild his credibility, and what would you suggest he do toward that end?
Okay, so no, I mean, I don't really think there's a way for him to rebuild that credibility. I wouldn't really be interested in it. Now, that's not me saying like he could never be a genuine Christian or anything. Like, that's between him and God. I hope he is. I hope he grows in that. That's all fine. I never see myself trusting or investing anything meaningful in Tucker Carlson or his opinions. And I would advise basically against that for any media entertainment celebrity. Again, like I think they have a role, but I think I would advise against elevating it very much at all. Now, you mentioned boycotting him. I do want to hit on this topic because this is an interesting conversation that's happened. And it's the difference between platforming or deplatforming versus canceling. So I've seen a lot of people say of Tucker and Nick, well, I thought the right was against cancellation. And now you want to, now you want to tell Tucker what he can say on his show, or now you want to, deplatform Nick. And what I say to this is we need to define our terms. So cancellation to me entails a few things. Cancellation entails typically looking to get the government involved to censor someone. So this would be like in the Biden years when the White House was actually flagging social media posts and influencing private companies to take down and take away the voices of those social media creators. That's cancellation. Cancellation is going after someone using alternate means. Very often the law, the police, lawsuits, slander, and trying to get them silenced and make it so that they have no access to any platform whatsoever. So this is something that again, the left has done very well and very effectively in the past 5 years, where they would go after people who they didn't like, and they would try to get them up to and including the president of the United States banned off of social media, not welcome in the public square. That's cancellation. Deplatforming versus platforming is something that we all do every day, and it's not cancellation. So platforming is where you welcome someone on to share their ideas, and then you can either choose to have them on your platform or not. Or when you have them on, you can choose how to interact with them. Am I going to push them in a debate, or am I going to check their ideas that I think are bad ideas, or am I just going to do what Tucker did, which is offer a puff piece interview to someone with no checks or balances in it whatsoever? Now, I'm not calling for removing Tucker's access to social media. I don't think the government should be involved in it. I don't think any of us have a right to tell Tucker what to say on his show. I do think we have a right as his listeners to say, we don't like that. You claim to represent us. We don't support that. Maybe we want to boycott that. Maybe we don't want to listen to your shows anymore. That's not cancellation. And the last two things I'd say here are, for anyone who still doesn't understand this, not having someone on your platform is exactly the reason that you don't go to an Islamic mosque and expect to hear a Jewish rabbi speaking. You don't go to a Christian church and expect to hear a pagan furry talking about his sexual fantasies. They're not canceling those people. It's just that they have no obligation to offer their platform to those people. That's not cancellation. It's not the same thing. And we need to be able to differentiate between those things. So I'll cut it there. We could talk about that more, but that's a real thing that has kind of been grinding my gears is hearing people kind of try to mix those terms and pretending that they don't understand the difference between the two.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And when you talk about platforming specifically, there's also the implication of affirmation involved in platforming, and that's different. So when Tucker Carlson platforms and Nick Fuentes and doesn't push back at all, if he's going to give him that platform and just throw softballs and eat cotton candy together, there is at least a perceived implicit unstated affirmation of, hey, you must be right. And those are some things. If you're going to say, well, this is my worldview. If you're going to say you're a Christian, if you're going to say you're a conservative, affirming somebody like Fuentes and his beliefs doesn't line up. And so, yeah, why would you platform someone like that? Last question, and thank you so much for your time and for your article. It really is it's a fantastic article. Remember, go to crosspoliticnews.com. That is crosspoliticnews.com. You see it on the bottom of the screen there. It's still on the front page. Just scroll down a little bit. You will see. In fact, can I bring it up? I think I can. Let me go backwards and make sure everybody knows where it is. Let's see here. Okay, here is front page Crosspolitic News. There's Nick Fuentes right there. Look at that lovely mug. We go down just a little bit. Here's the many faces of Tucker Carlson right there in the middle. Check it out as soon as you can. All right. Last question for us here. Given your critique that Tucker Carlson may be more about maintaining clicks than conviction. And I want to speak about this for the broader conservative movement, if there is one. Sometimes I think it's more of an industry than a movement, but that's another conversation. Nonetheless, what might be some of the broader implications for the right, for emerging right-wing media and that ecosystem that Christians are certainly a part of?
Yeah. I think I would bring it back to what we talked about a little bit concerning investing in where your feet are. So in your home, your community, your state, I would take that as a driving influence to view that no one is going to care about or know the needs of your family, your friends, and your community as well as you do. And I think that's a very Christian idea, but I don't think you have to be a Christian to embrace that idea.
Sure.
And so I would take that as an indicator that that you should be very careful about who you trust, and you best know who you trust when you actually have a personal relationship with the person in question. That's kind of what I would take from it. The other thing I would take from it is just that I think we need to, as the right wing at large, the right wing in general, we need to be careful not to become what we have fought against and not to become what we hate. And this is where we could have, again, a very long discussion about the woke right that has basically adopted the talking points of woke, which is predominantly, or at least used to be, a left-wing ideology, and has just put a right-wing spin on it. So we need to be intellectually honest. And I'm going to say something here that I think will trigger some people, but we need to police our own movement. Again, that's not cancellation. Policing your own movement is the same reason that your Christian Bible study doesn't welcome in Satanists to come and preach about Satanism in your Bible study. That's not cancellation. That's policing your movement. You decide who you welcome into your movement. You decide who you prop up. You decide who you elevate as spokespeople and as leaders of your movement. I know there are going to be people who pretend they don't understand this. I know there are going to be people like Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly who pretend that they're like, wait, I thought you were against cancellation. And yet those same people are people who rightly called out media bias when, for instance, when Donald Trump was debating someone like a Kamala or a Joe Biden, and the debate moderator was treating Donald Trump differently than they treated his opponent. Those people rightly identified that, wait a second, there are two different types of moderation happening here, and that's the difference. There are two different types of interviews happening here when you look at Donald Trump's 60 Minutes versus the 60 Minutes given to any leftist. And that's the difference. That's what matters. That type of bias that's in play, that type of acceptance, elevation, puff piece, softball, whitewashing of a Nick Fuentes, that is what we're talking about. We're not talking about violating your free speech. We're not talking about taking away your access to X or to social media. We're talking about policing our own movement. And again, for anyone who's triggered about that, I really think you need to step back and think long and hard about whether or not you're actually capable of differentiating what I'm saying and what many on really the side that I'm on are saying about this. Because I think most of you are. I think most people are capable of differentiating that. They just pretend they're not because it feels good and it helps to prop up their side of the argument.
Luke Edison, thank you once again for being with us on this episode of Crosspolitic Countdown. Obviously, your work can be found on crosspoliticnews.com. Is there anywhere else people can go to find you or some of your work?
On socials at Real Luke Edison.
At Real Luke Edison. All right, there you have it. And that is going to do it for this week's edition of Crosspolitic Countdown. For Luke Edison, I'm Andrew Southwick. Thank you for spending some time with us. Remember, like, share, subscribe, all the fun stuff. Leave your opinions in the comments. What do you think of Tucker Carlson? Is he an opportunist? Is he a grifter? Is he based, maybe, to use the term? Or, something else? Should he be canceled? Should he be boycotted? Should he be deplatformed? We want to hear what you think about it. Let us know in the comments below. Until, let's see, next time. Remember, every Friday is midday right here on our YouTube channel. We'll see you again next week.